Welcome to Thriving in a Changing Landscape, Enhancing Skills and Collaboration in Agricultural Supply Chains. Supply chain and sustainability professionals are facing unprecedented change, particularly those managing and working within agricultural supply chains. This is causing a fundamental shift in the skills and capabilities that we as supply chain, sustainability and procurement professionals need to progress, excel and thrive within our roles. Within this webinar, I'm joined by two leading recruitment consultancies who share the emerging trends within the supply chain and sustainability leader talent market, so you can learn how you can thrive within the changing context. I'm your host, David Taylor. I'm head of EMEA sales and business development at agronomic intelligence and analytics company Agritask. I'm joined by Josh Huggins, who's founder of GS2 Partnership, a certified B Corp pending executive search firm, and Andrew Daly and Peter Brophy, who lead the digital procurement and supply chain practice at Specialist Recruiters Edbury Daly. Thank you all.
Hi there, and thank you.
Thanks, David.
Hi, David.
So, I'm hoping over the next half an hour, 45 minutes, we're going to have a really interesting conversation that will help people to better understand what in the world is changing and how ultimately they can prepare themselves and their teams so that they can achieve their organizational goals, but also progress within their career. So to kick off and help everyone tune into the conversation today, I'd love for you to share your perspective of what challenges you're seeing supply chain and sustainability professionals are being asked to address within the kind of assignments that companies are coming to you with. Josh, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, yes, perfect. And thank you very much for having me today, David. It's great to talk about this emerging topic. So I think, and with most of the answers, I'll be addressing it more from a sustainability perspective, as that's where we recruit. I think one of the key areas that we're really seeing now from a challenging perspective is that search for perfect. A lot of organizations, I think over the last couple of years, have set some very bold and ambitious targets, and keeping up to date with the trends, the emerging technologies, and staying on top of everything is a challenge for sustainability professionals. And I think in trying to achieve everything, some organizations aren't actually moving the dial very much. So one of the things that I see a lot of good sustainability professionals and leaders achieve is by really focusing on the core drivers that are going to make the most impact. And in doing so, and when they look at that, and that's to take one material area that they have within their organization, they can really become leading in that space and building from there. I think with the lean small teams that we see across sustainability, trying to achieve everything all at once is just not going to move the dial much. So yeah, I think a challenge that's faced is to stay on top of everything, and I think the way to do it is to be quite razor focused on the areas that you believe you can have the most impact on.
Thank you. And Andrew, from a procurement and supply chain point of view, what kind of trends are you seeing?
Well, thank you also, David, for the invite for myself and Peter. And yeah, in contrast to Josh, we've got a slightly different perspective. It's more procurement, supply chain, and also a lot to do with tech. And it's been a very, very difficult period for procurement and supply chain professionals the last couple of years, because we've had these very sort of unexpected events. You know, we're still dealing with the consequences of COVID for a lot of supply chains. You know, the impact on the international supply chains, of course. In the UK, we've got Brexit, which presents a unique set of complexities, shall we say. And then we've got the war in Ukraine, we've got inflation, the wider economic picture. So procurement and supply chain professionals are really having to juggle an awful lot of challenges that are beyond their control at a time when they also want to embrace ESG opportunities and the adoption of tech as they sort of drive more towards value rather than cost, which has been their traditional focus. So there's a whole range of things that procurement and supply chain professionals are having to juggle. And really, for different organisations, it's choosing where they've got to prioritise, where they can spend their limited resources. And to Josh's point about laser focus, you know, try to focus on the things that you can really influence and impact for your organisation. You can't do it all at once. So yeah, it's been a very, very challenging period for that whole profession in this last couple of years.
Just to add it into that, Andrew, I think, you know, just as an example, the Ukraine war last year, you know, a lot of initiatives just went out the window when all of a sudden the supply chains disrupted, particularly in agriculture, food supply, etc. Procurement professionals just had to completely reset what they were doing, complete new set of priorities. You know, price were rocketing. You know, all the old normal just disappeared overnight. Yeah, in the last 2 years, it's just changed the environment completely.
And we heard from Josh about sustainability being prioritized a lot around materially important issues. So the issues that have the greatest impact on the environment or society. What are you seeing that supply chain and procurement professionals using to prioritize and have that laser focus, as you say?
Was that a question direct to me, David? Yes.
Yeah, either Peter or Andrew. Yeah, what are procurement and sustainable supply chain users using for that prioritization? Are there any key metrics or that they're using?
It's interesting, right? Because some procurement supply chain professionals talk to me that, you know, some of what Josh mentioned about sustainability professionals having, you know, a real broad focus and having multiple priorities to juggle. Procurement supply chain people have got the same challenges, and they haven't to analyze the data, find suppliers. You know, they need to actually, you know, for them it's about, you know, do they have the right sustainability literacy? Almost, you know, many of them have had to learn this as in the last 2 years. Yeah, they've almost had nowhere to go to get this information. I don't know if you agree with that, Andrew, from what you see.
Yeah, there's been a sort of real emphasis on self-education for a lot of these people.
Yeah.
So yeah, to Pete's point, I think that there's been, you know, what are we trying to achieve here? Do we truly understand our objectives and the landscape? You know, the liaising and working with sustainability professionals in their organisations. Different sectors have got different agendas, of course. It's higher up the agenda for certain types of organisations than others. And then you've got conflicting priorities around, because there's a cost, isn't there? There's a cost associated with prioritising sustainability, but other organisations have other priorities in that area. So it's juggling all those conflicting priorities whilst educating yourself and then engaging with the business internally. When you've got sustainability people, the sort that Josh deals with, who are championing this, and you've got others that, you know, may not see the value, of course. So you've got this sort of stakeholder engagement. And then you've got the whole issue of the supplier base, of course, and the visibility cost of that supplier base, the information, and how you go about sort of communicating your objectives to them.
I think so, Andrew. And interesting, one of the comments, David, is to back to your point about how they measure it, is procurement people have always been, you know, they've always operated around projects. Yeah, they've had multiple projects at the same time with multiple KPIs, and to some extent, business professionals, regardless, you know, they have targets linked to their job that they get rewarded for often. And sometimes it needs the business and people in the, you know, at senior management levels to understand that sustainability is a value rather than a monetary thing. Sometimes, you know, it's actually for the greater good, and it's incorporating these into KPIs that actually is part of the challenge sometimes in some organizations. Some organizations, I don't think, translate words into actual business metrics, and that's sometimes a challenge. You know, what measure gets done ultimately, and if a procurement person is being targeted on delivery times, price, etc., that's what they'll have to focus on. Yeah, so we need to convert. I think as businesses, you know, the business leaders need to convert strategy about sustainability into measures. Yeah, and that's sometimes outside of the control of procurement supply chain people. I don't know if it's the same for sustainability professionals, Josh, in their situation.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that you mentioned there that's interesting is the fact that people are having to learn this new area. And of course, you know, sustainability as a concept has been around for a very long time, but in the last couple of years, it's taken on such more prominence within not just the boardroom or from an investor perspective, but throughout the organization and the operation, as you see the bottom-up approach and staff starting to want and demand more from the organization. So I think there is this whole piece around learning that the business has to do. And to your point around kind of embedding sustainability into the strategy, well, I see the organizations that really make it the biggest impact is it's not just embedding sustainability into the strategy, it's actually looking at shifting the strategy to make it a sustainable strategy. And I think that nuance is something that organizations are really starting to understand. If you can combine your kind of the commercial offering as an organization, but tied in to something that has a regenerative nature or something around the circular economy, brings in sustainable elements, you really start to then bring everybody on the journey. And that's what makes it a lot easier for individuals within supply chain or sustainability or any central function to deliver is when you bring the operational teams alongside with you, and I think that's been one of the challenges for some individuals in organisations where perhaps that top line commitment isn't there, and they're just trying to put a kind of a green gloss on something that is unsustainable. But that's a tough challenge to overcome, I suppose.
Exactly.
And as you said, Josh, so that when you're trying to quantify some of these sustainability metrics, it can often feel really ambiguous. And for me, that just forms one part of a phrase which I really like to summarize kind of the environment in which we're operating in at the moment, which is VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And that's really kind of the environment that supply chain procurement sustainability professionals are having to navigate, both in terms of achieving those organizational goals, like you said, Peter, drive forward the environmental and social strategy from a sustainability perspective, but also grow their careers. So if you all think to the types of skills and capabilities, like whether they're hard skills or they're more the soft skills, what new capabilities are you seeing that organizations require of their professionals and leaders within this space? Peter?
I think interesting, it to some extent depends on where the organisation is in its maturity and the size and scale of it, and as Andrew said, the sector. What I've seen, some of the briefs I've had on this, and these are direct assignments, it can actually just be about the knowledge and understanding, because often, certainly in smaller organisations, which I've been working with over the last couple of years, this is new to them. Yeah, they're having to put in place something. So it's almost, do you have a roadmap? Yeah. Do you know the steps that we need to take? What knowledge are you bringing to the table? What sustainability literacy do you have? Yeah. And then you almost go back to traditional things like supply chain mapping, supplier engagement, data analysis, because when you get into an organization, the first thing you need to understand is what's happening in the first place. What's your carbon footprint right now? Most organizations, you'd be surprised to know, or maybe not surprised to know, have no idea their carbon impact. Yeah, there are technologies out there that can help you do this, but some of them, as Andrew knows quite well, actually just take the average, of a particular activity, whether that's transport, logistics, etc. So that what level of granularity do you have on your data? And it's improving this all the time. Ultimately, it's knowledge. Yeah, that's I think what's driving the market is the lack of knowledge that people actually have. I don't know if you agree with that, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, I've got sort of a couple of thoughts on this, and from two sides of the fence, really. So if you look at what I would consider to be the elite procurement and supply chain function, so there's a set of organisations that have long established, really great leadership and procurement and supply chain, great talent, and they have all those great benefits you see in terms of training, use of tech, all those things. They sort of they grow great talent themselves, and so a couple of FMCG businesses spring to mind, and I've seen some of their sustainability leadership people in their procurement team, and they're the sort of people who've done the Cambridge University sustainability course or the Harvard one. They've gone and self-educated, said, look, I want to do this, I want to be at the heart of this, I'm managing a category where this really matters, and they've gone and they've developed themselves and got that sustainability literacy that Pete talks about. The other side is in the tech, so of course we talked there about the data, and obviously this is a subject close to your heart, David. And people working on for software companies that are able to give the visibility and the data that these professionals need to make the impact they want to make. People working in that space, they're also to a degree quite self-educated. They've decided they want to learn the domain knowledge and built up a real understanding of the marketplace that they operate in, the challenges of the professionals that they're liaising with. So all those things around suppliers, data, use of tech, understanding of sustainable practices and things around climate, et cetera. They're things we're seeing people really develop themselves amongst the elites. I'm not seeing an enormous amount of evidence of people actively hiring for those skills in procurement and supply chain yet. I suspect you're probably seeing more than that than we do, Josh, in the actual pure sustainability.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think to go back to sort of fundamental of the knowledge and understanding is really important, and there's a huge amount of focus, of course, and rightly so, on soft skills. And I think, to solve these problems, of course, those skills around collaboration and engagement are critical and crucial. But I think the baseline understanding and the fundamental principles of sustainability or environmental management have probably been a little bit overlooked in the last couple of years. And as this rush to hire sustainability, ESG, whatever the title is that the organization gives professionals has been, what we've seen is individuals who know the organization really well, they have all those soft skills and those relationships, they're given the remit to lead sustainability. Maybe they've set targets, and maybe they're achievable, maybe they're not. But I think there's actually probably been a big question mark about whether they know the answer to that or not, because they don't have those fundamental kind of the fundamental groundings around sustainability, sustainable principles, even sort of business governance, from a risk perspective. So I think those skills are crucial. And you're right, there's a lot of individuals who have gone to Cambridge, Harvard, and done the short courses as well to try to get up to speed. But this is a very complex subject, and I think that can sometimes be overlooked, that it's just another function that can be run by a leader. I believe that it needs a blend, and if you have that leader that is a generalist, they really need deep technical expertise in the function, or they need to be supported by high-level consultancies to support them. And then once you get that base level of understanding into the team or the function, I think that's when you can then look at these further skills that are coming through. So I think you've mentioned a lot of them, but I think the analytical thinking is a huge issue, is around data, of course. And I think having technical individuals from a sustainability and environmental perspective have to shift to understand more from an analytical perspective, and even how you analyze data and then visualize it to showcase it to the organization. I think the kind of data visualization is a really impactful way now that we're starting to see people from sustainability backgrounds, I suppose, win hearts and minds, because there's really easy ways to demonstrate the impact that I think a lot of people, if you go back 5 years, probably didn't care about or understand. We see on LinkedIn all the time these new kind of ways to visualize the data around World Overshoot Day or whatever it might be, because I think there's a great way to do that. I think then technology, again, you have to be able to understand technology. If you think of something like SEDEX as an example, it's not just being able to understand it yourself, but then it's also being able to explain to others why it's important, explain to your suppliers why you need them to sign up to this, explaining to your organization, if it's a big global matrix business, why that's an important way to work, and it's not just relying on old relationships to be able to capture the data. So I think there's that. And then I think the final piece that we haven't touched upon, especially for global roles, is something that you might not immediately think about, but I suppose it's about that kind of political awareness. If you think about the ESG or sustainability landscape in the US as an example, it's highly politicized, and it can be used as a weapon for businesses to either do what they need to or not. And I think if you're not aware of that and you're going into new territories to try to push the same message, you're going to fall flat on your face. And those would be some of the skills I think that probably, if you go back a few years, wouldn't have been needed, but now really are coming to the fore.
That point you make about the use of data, Josh, is really relevant across the wider procurement and supply chain profession as well, which Pete and I work in a lot, because we've heard a lot of stories about people missing an opportunity to take this much more powerful and insightful data and having the skills to actually present it to stakeholders, to suppliers, to the executive leadership team, to team members, and the power of it. And we're still waiting to really see that become, there's a lot more talk about the use of it than there is the effective use of it, really. We're still, a lot of people are still on the journey to get there. And I think that's something which is very, very important in this specific space, but also the wider supply chains. A lot of great tech out there now. One of the problems we've got is the tech literacy is really sort of causing problems with adoption. I think that's something which has really got to be addressed. Procurement, supply chain, sustainability professionals, because without that, that you're sort of partially sighted almost in terms of the job you're trying to do.
Well, part of the bigger picture, Andrew, is it not that many organisations still don't understand that what they're buying and who from? Yeah,
that's a whole other webinar, that, Pete.
Yeah, it's a whole nother. I know, but it just on your point, Josh. That the challenge for procurement supply chain people is actually just understanding all the data they have. Yeah, and getting to it. It's a really difficult one in some organisation.
Well, we're seeing now. I suppose the conversations I've been having with corporate sustainability teams over the past few months because of annual reporting. You can't speak to anybody because they're head down in data, crunching it, making sure it gets validated, and the assurance that goes with it, because of how much a part of the report that is, and also the scrutiny now that we're seeing with regards to data. So 3 months of work is going into making sure that the data is there, it's clear, it's validated, and correct. And whilst that's always been a huge thing from a financial reporting perspective, I think it's just grown ridiculous arms and legs in the last couple of years, which is why technology like Agritask is so important to help organizations to understand that. And I think when I talk to organizations, when they haven't integrated the technology successfully, it's causing so much pain for them when they come around to this time. And actually what it results in, probably quite good for us, but is more resource needed and temporary solutions to just help get them over the line. But it could be streamlined so much more if they would to adopt great technology.
And there's a really nice line to draw there, Josh, between the theme of our opening question around prioritization of goals. Ultimately, there's a proliferation of technology and data, and therefore it's so important to prioritize what data is going to be most valuable for your organization. And if you're working in agricultural supply chain, it's ultimately where is the impact, both in terms of cost, but in terms of environmental and social impact. And that's further down your supply chain to where your product is being grown. So that will become really, really critical. What I will say, ultimately, if you have a burning question that you want to ask any of our participants on the panel today, please feel free to add your comments into the question. And to close out today's webinar, we will be answering those questions. So feel free to get involved. Back onto the conversation. We've heard a lot about technology hugely disrupting the talent market, about whether it's robots are going to be taking our jobs or whether it's ChatGPT is going to completely remove the need for us to engage our brains when writing emails. I'd love just to do a quick fire round of what impact people think technology is going to have on the role of a procurement, supply chain, or sustainability professional over the next 5 years, let's say, to make it a little bit more actionable. So, Josh, technology, good or bad?
Yeah, I think of course, technology is utilized correctly is of course a fantastic opportunity for organizations to streamline, to be effective, and to operate at optimum performance. I think to start with, it's especially important around sort of baselining and understanding where you are now, because I think a lot of organizations aren't doing that, as Peter mentioned. And then once that's done, then I think you can set clear targets and objectives by utilizing the technology to help facilitate the improvements. But of course, it can't be done through technology alone. And I think that's the thing that we've all sort of alluded to already. Technology is fantastic, but when you look at the population, the working population, if a lot of these individuals within the organization do not understand that technology, then it won't be used to its maximum effect. So the softer skills of project and program management, training, support, development are still really important. And I think we'll never lose that personal need to support and train people to do it. AI is brilliant at providing prompt support to speed things up, but I think you have to understand the type of direction you want to go in the first place to maximize it. So overall opportunity, but it still needs that human touch for me.
Thank you. And I think that the skill of project and program management is one that's not been as come out as clearly, but for me that's a really tangible skill that's required within the world of procurement, supply chain, sustainability. Sure. Peter.
I'd agree with everything Josh says, actually, to some extent, for procurement supply chain people. My point, Josh, actually was going to be about, the tech's allowing us to gather more data and actually understand what's going on. You need to be able to actually take the data, understand it, and then turn that into KPIs and metrics. Yeah, I think at the minute, it's about performance measurement that then drives those behaviors. And I think that's going to be, collecting and analysing the relevant data is going to be really important going forward. But interesting, I've had this discussion with some consultancies, and to your point, Josh, the softer skills, ultimately, procurement supply chain person still needs to do the stakeholder engagement in the organization. That they're not operating in a silo. They also need to talk to suppliers and collaborate with them. They need to engender trust, get people to talk openly about their own challenges, their own problems, embed their own people in suppliers, work in partnership. If historically some procurement supply chain functions were seen as almost command and control, and it's flipping that right around now. So it's a whole new world for them in terms of both soft skills and digital skills, I think.
And also with the focus on scope 3 particularly, there's the need to go beyond your immediate suppliers, both up and down the supply chain, either to collaborate with your customers or to work with your tier 2, tier 3, or the nth tier suppliers around those sustainability initiatives as well. So yeah, Andrew.
Well, I mean, I echo everything Josh and Peter have just said. The one thing I would add is that I think it's a wonderful opportunity for people with the right mindset. So, if you look at your own personal career, all this tech's there now, it's changing your job. It's giving you an opportunity to do your job better if you've got the tech literacy. And that is something which you can learn. You can certainly, so many resources out there for you to improve yourself. Don't just wait for your bosses to train you, actually go and make it happen. And then to Josh's point about the softer skills, I think that enables the evolution of those skills. So, for example, in procurement, a lot of the tech automates some fairly tactical stuff, which theoretically frees up time focused on more strategic activities, which brings into greater focus the sort of skills Josh is talking about in terms of your ability to manage your relationships with your stakeholders and your suppliers, and your ability to drive change management and do critical thinking around the actual information you've got. So there's a whole opportunity for people to develop themselves by using the tech and realizing that there are other skills that will enable them to use it more effectively can be enhanced. And that's, I think, a great thing for many of us to embrace, really.
So if we focus in on this, so if we've got people on this call who either want to be proactive in developing themselves, or leaders who want to make sure that their teams fill those key gaps that we've spoken about, what are some resources or activities that supply chain professionals, procurement professionals, sustainability professionals could do to start bridging some of these gaps that we've spoken about? Josh.
Well, I think there's a huge amount they can do, and especially I think since COVID, it's allowed people to learn in a much more agile way alongside and in amongst their careers. So if you think about the growth of online courses since COVID, that's it's exploded way beyond what it would have been before. I think it's already been mentioned, but Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership is a fantastic resource that I know a lot of sustainability professionals use, but also individuals just interested in the subject that are executive leaders or managers within an organization. They don't just offer a generalist course, they also offer very specialist courses for particular operational executive type roles to tie sustainability into that. So I think that they're a great resource that lots of people I know have done. At the University of Oxford, they have the Side Business School, which also has developed courses as well that look at that. But I think it depends on your level and what you're trying to achieve. You have to understand what the outcome is that you're looking for, and therefore and you will be able to tie into particular resources. But if it is something that's more around tying sustainability into business objectives, well, there's no point in just talking about the theoretical and technical skill set. I would recommend that someone would get a mentor, an executive mentor or sponsor who they can talk about a technical piece of legislation or a trend, how that would affect that person in their role, and then maybe work together to try to come up with a solution. And I think sometimes most senior leaders are happy to mentor and support people on the way up. I don't think there's enough future leaders or aspiring leaders who take it amongst themselves to go and to seek out a mentor. And I think unless your organization has a program and it's given to you, there's not enough people that do that. So it's something I actually ran in my old business. We created a leadership program where we invited people to it. But I think it's something that proactively you can easily do within your organization. And guess what? The side benefit is you're raising your profile with executives within the organization. So it's a win-win. And that's something I think just proactively without a formal training course you can do that can really help you grow and develop in your career.
Thank you. How about from the procurement and supply chain side of the fence, Peter?
I think it's very similar to what Josh has mentioned on this side of the fence, actually. I actually think there's a personal attribute here as well that plays into this actually very well, which we've heard a lot of in the last couple of years. And sometimes this comes from the consultancies, which is actual personal curiosity. Yeah, curiosity in everything you do. Yeah, and actually, just watching a webinar like this today, you can learn a lot just by association. So, but interesting enough, within the procurement supply chain world, there are some associations who do courses on this. So some of the professional associations, such as SIPs, there are organizations such as Procurement Leaders, there's APICS, the Association for Supply Chain Management, there's the Institute of Supply Chain Management, I believe there's the Green Supply Chain Organization, the Global Reporting Initiative. There's a number of actual associations and bodies which people can look to join and associate with, where there are courses available. Yeah, and you need to just research those online. Of course, there are various academic qualifications in this now. I've done one myself, yes, that are available through various government things. These things take time though, and I think attending webinars, attending seminars, attending conferences. We were at a conference last week, World Procurement Congress, where you get a number of senior procurement people there, and actually some of the topics and some of the seminars are directly relatable to this. But also just having conversations with some of the vendors, understanding what's going on in the world. So attending conferences and seminars can be a real source of knowledge, actually. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, you can do degree courses, you can do formal training. I guess my personal challenge with that is these things tend to be retrospective rather than proactive and future looking. I don't know if that's the same for you, Josh. Yeah, but I think you need to be following what's happening now rather than what's happened before. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yes, I completely agree. I think that the issue also is that the status of for us in sustainability is moving so quickly, how outdated things can become in 6 months, 3 months, definitely 2 years. If you do a 2-year course, by the time you finish that course in sustainability, the market's moved on so much. Actually, the things you were learning are no longer relevant. So you have to, of course, that fundamental technical knowledge is important, but you have to still be keeping up to date with things on an ongoing basis. So yes, webinars, engagements, loads of events. I mean, I could probably go to an event pretty much every day of the week, every week, because of how many sustainability events there are out there. So people are talking about this. It's gaining momentum. If you want to learn, put yourself out there and you will. But I think it's about that proactive approach yourself rather than waiting for it to be handed to you, because it's just that's not the way that you're going to help develop your own career.
Well, exactly. And I was talking to a consultant last week about this, and he's impressed more by people who volunteer, and get involved in some local community project, take something on, actually by volunteering sometimes and helping a local group, even if it's just, on a very small scale. Some of the skills and things you'll learn are far greater than you'll learn from a textbook, and that then plays into the broader business skills and engagement skills and stakeholder skills that are actually equally as valuable. So it's sometimes looking for opportunities to learn in a broader sense linked to sustainability, not just a specific training course. And I hope that answers the question for you, David. But I think there's not a roadmap out there. This is evolving. It's changing so rapidly.
Well, I think there's a really nice parallel to be drawn with doctors. There's a particular principle which is over the 7-8 years of a doctor training in medicine, by the end of that course, 50% of the quote unquote facts that they've learned will be outdated. And I think that just demonstrates that the fundamental skill of learning and adaptability should be the foundation of any procurement, supply chain or sustainability's professional skill set. And I suppose in that spirit, we'll now switch over to the Q&A, which our panelists here haven't prepared for, so they get to demonstrate their own adaptability and thinking on the fly. So if we go to our first question, which is from the chat, can you mention real sustainability policies or practices that your organizations or the ones that you're working with are currently doing? So just help bring the subject to life a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I can start because, as you can probably tell, I'm in my office today, and one of the things that was important to us, and we're a small business ourselves, but when we chose the office location that we were looking at, we were really stringent around some of the environmental credentials of the building that we actually occupy. So I think it's about I know we spoke about material impact, but as a recruitment business, our footprint is fairly low. But the biggest one for us is our office space and the energy that we consume and how that looks. So we chose an office that looks at using renewable energy through the way that it's heated, and also ensuring that, as you can see with the plants behind me, that we keep a nice positive and sustainable view to the office environment as well. I think on a bigger scale and organisations that we've worked with, it's always about embedding sustainability high-level sustainability principles into everything that the organisation does. Whether that's there's a bit of a top kind of debate around it at the moment, from linking executive pay to sustainability outcomes. I think if it's done correctly, that can be a positive. I think it can also be used incorrectly. So you need to make sure that the organisation is correct with that. But building it into leadership principles, promotion criteria, that people are made to measure it and to improve it in any capacity will have an impact. So I think it's about embedding the principle of sustainability into every single function within the business will have the biggest impact.
Thank you. Andrew, Peter, anything to add?
Not a great deal to that, really, from what Josh said. A very similar scenario, other than to say that in our world, it's really the very elite procurement and supply chain functions that are making the sort of, they're forging the path for the others, really. And I think for the main body of the profession, it's still something they want to do. They know they've got to do, but they're fighting all these other prizes that we've already talked about today. And I think that's one of the big challenges that they face. So there's an appetite, but like many other things in life, getting around to when that's actually a focus, and that's one of the problems that we all face in terms of this overall picture, really.
And Andrew, can I ask something? With your with those elite organisations you're referring to, do they have sustainability professionals who sit in the supply chain function, or do they have supply chain individuals who are made to think more sustainably?
That's a really good question, Josh. I think that from what we've seen so far, what you've got is the person who really springs to mind, who's the sort of shining light that I would pick up, is she was the category director for ingredients for a big FMCG firm. And she realised that, from her own social conscience and her own professional development, that this was the direction of travel. So she went out there and she self-educated. She did the Cambridge course and she made herself into an expert, and then she's developed a team around her. And she's built great relationships with her stakeholders in the sustainability team. So I think that is the sort of template that I'm seeing most of, where really the sustainability professionals that you would engage with are the stakeholders, and the procurement people are the commercial end of that, if you will. But I'm sure we will see sustainability professionals embedded in supply chain procurement functions in some of these elite. And if it's not happened already, I think it will happen.
Yeah. Well, we see it.
Collaboration.
Yeah, we see it. There was a large search we recently completed for a FTSE 100 business, and one of the search was for a global lead for their supply chain risk. And when we were mapping the market, we found with a number of these leading FMCG organisations and other manufacturing businesses, there was a blended approach. Some had very much a central function that engaged with supply chain and the category teams, and others had dedicated individuals in the function who either were supply chain professionals who had made that transition, or were people from a central function that wanted to get closer to the business and actually sort of operationalize their approach. And I don't think there's a kind of pass or fail or a right or a wrong. I think it's all about relationships, but for each business it will work differently. But it's just interesting to see your perspective on that.
I think that blended approach that you talk about, Josh, could be the option, because I have heard one or two stories about the sustainability people have gone and made some, a point you made earlier, some fairly ambitious targets, which they've said, publicly, and the procurement people are saying, hang on a minute, all the carbon's in the supply chain, and you're asking us to deliver things that we're not sure we can deliver anytime soon. And so there's been a bit of a disconnect. So I think relationships, collaboration, and departments working much closer together is going to be required. Otherwise, there could be a bit of a professional standoff between the two areas if we're not careful.
Yeah. Well, I think it's that we're seeing that happen already, because we have what we call the sustainability strategy 2.0. So 2 years ago, the organisations were going out, we're going to hit net zero by 2030, whatever it might be, without knowing how they actually achieve that, and then having to now backtrack from that and reset the objectives. And I think there's only a certain number of times you can do that before your employees lose trust in what it is that you say. And as we've seen from some statistics over the past 6 months, I'm sure you've both seen the number of individuals that are making decisions about where they work based upon the sustainability appreciation of their organization is growing. And I think I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it was somewhere between 25 and 33%, especially of millennials, were making career decisions based upon those credentials, which is a huge amount. And you think about it from just a talent retention perspective, it can have a much wider effect than just on one individual function.
For sure.
Andrew made an interesting point a moment ago around the need for increased cross-functional collaboration, but particularly as companies start to focus on the impact of their value chain and how their value chain interacts with others, we're going to need an increasing amount of cross-company collaboration, both up and down the supply chain, but also potentially between companies who share the same crop rotation. What's some of the advice that you'd have about kicking off some pre-competitive collaboration about sustainability or procurement initiatives that require different companies to work together?
We actually saw some of this last week. So Pete and I were invited to a round table by one of our biggest customers at the World Procurement Congress. And you had probably about 30 pretty senior procurement leaders in the room.
Yep.
And initially it was all a bit of a standoff. And then of course the sort of, the shutters come down, people feel a bit more relaxed, and you've got open discussion. You could tell there were going to be people who carry that conversation out of the room at the end of the session and go and grab a coffee and continue to talk. And they would perhaps see some opportunity to, let the barriers come down and perhaps put aside past sort of rivalries or competition and start to work for the greater good. And I think we need more of that. And events is a great place for that to happen, where you can actually meet people, realize, we're not in direct competition in every sense of the word. And actually, with the suppliers who need an extra incentive to really, raise their game in these areas or see the commercial value of it, some collaboration between industry heavyweights, particularly in FMCG, etc., I think is welcome. So I think people actually getting around the table together is a starting point. Relationships, softer skills, something we've touched on a great deal already today.
I think there's probably three areas that I would look at from this regard that I would encourage people to think about. So I think the first thing is to try and influence, like's been said, mindset and the kind of culture around what is sustainability and how does it play a part in the organization that you work for, and trying to make sure that it becomes something that's actually just integral to good business, not just being a competitive advantage. I think the second is looking at trying to utilize independent data providers to verify data, that it can be anonymized. If everybody's looking at having the same suppliers and supply chain, then actually if you have an independent third party that can take that data, then you can use that for your own scope 3 emissions and how that works. And then I think the third one is actually think of it as a business opportunity. When you think about economies of scale, if you're engaging with 2 or 3 of your large competitors, the power of that can actually help make things happen much quicker, much more efficiently, and much more effectively than just going in alone. So partnerships with your potentially competitors or even NGOs that can support you can give a bit more weight to what you're trying to do, rather than one company going in one direction, another company going in another. So I think when you think of economies of scale, there's also actually probably a commercial benefit to it as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that about brings us to the end of our webinar today. However, I just want to leave our audience with just some really actionable takeaways that they can leave today's webinar and hopefully implement in both either their career or in terms of supporting their teams. I'd love you just to give me just one thing that somebody could take away to implement for their own career or their teams based on what we've spoken about today. Andrew.
Well, just echo a point I think we've all made already, really, which is, don't wait for it to happen to you. Don't wait for other people to take the sort of lead. Get out there and make it happen for your own career. You put yourself at the front of the queue for opportunities, both internally and externally. There's so much resource out there. There's so much opportunity out there. Get out there, make it happen. Show that curiosity, that ambition, and your career, I'm sure, will benefit, and so will those of the people around you.
Yeah. Thank you. Peter?
I'd build on that slightly, in that there's a lot of self-development tools out there that are available, free of charge. Find one that works for you, download it, and set yourself some targets around it. Yeah, make it actionable. Get yourself a self-development plan in place. Don't wait for your company to put one in place for you.
Thank you. And Josh?
Yeah, I think I'd give a slightly different take and go with look at getting a mentor. I think a mentor can be great for you. And what I would say is, if possible, try for it not to be purely a technical mentor, because I think you can find sometimes you're kind of shouting into the echo chamber of talking to somebody who's already converted. If you can get somebody who's perhaps slightly on the edge and work with them as a mentor and how you can convince them, it's going to equip you so much better for when you're having these challenges in the business context. So I think get a mentor from somebody that's more senior than you, that's perhaps slightly more commercially aware, and see whether you can embed your sustainability principles into them, because if you can on one-to-one basis, you can definitely do it at scale. And yeah, that would be my top tip.
Thank you. And I'd like to personally extend my thanks to Andrew, Peter and Josh, who joined us today on the panel. Hopefully you all agree it was a really interesting conversation and above else actionable, and will benefit either you and your team in terms of your procurement, supply chain or sustainability career. If you don't do already, please do feel free to follow Agritask on LinkedIn. You can also find Andrew, Peter and Josh there as well. So please do reach out and connect to us all. And we look forward to continuing the conversation beyond today's webinar. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.